On the night of June 21st, General Collins sent an ultimatum by radio and messenger to General von Schlieben, pointing out that Cherbourg was isolated and the German position hopeless. He asked for the surrender of the port. The ultimatum was to expire at 0900 on June 22nd. Meanwhile, General Collins proceeded with plans for the assault of the semicircular perimeter of fortifications surrounding Cherbourg. Arrangements were also made for an 80-minute air bombardment of known enemy installations. Artillery fire was to immediately follow the bombing, and the attacking troops were to move rapidly to their initial objectives. During the last few days, the capture of Cherbourg had taken on an even greater urgency than it existed before. On June 19th, the highest tide of the year, combined with a 4-day storm, damaged landing craft and the 2 artificial harbors at Gold and Omaha beaches. The artificial harbor at Omaha Beach was so badly damaged that it had to be abandoned, threatening serious delay in the unloading of supplies. As a precaution against future shortages, First Army ordered a 1/3 reduction in artillery ammunition expenditure in the Cherbourg attack. On the morning of June 22nd, the ultimatum expired, without word from the German fortress commander. The weather had turned favorable. General Collins notified the division commanders that the attack would be launched at 1400 hours. A few minutes before the air bombardment, the front line was marked with yellow smoke, but even so, the infantry regiments were bombed and strafed by friendly aircraft for 30 minutes and called their headquarters to stop these attacks. The errors were believed to have been caused, at least in part, by the drift of the smoke and the fairly strong northeast wind. Measured by sheer physical destruction, the bombardment was not very effective. Its greatest effect was in cutting communications and depressing enemy morale. While the infantry attacks achieved penetrations of varying depth, no real breakthrough was made immediately anywhere along the front. All divisions were forced to a methodical reduction of strongpoints. The primary objective of the 4th Division was the Tourlaville area. Although the Germans detected the advancing 12th Infantry Regiment and opened fire from the slopes above the Saire River, the men of the 12th Infantry were able to break the German line with a determined charge, but isolated enemy groups slipped through and cut the supply routes to the 12th Infantry. The whole situation between Gonneville and Bois du Coudray was fluid. The 22nd Infantry was already being supplied by tank-escorted convoys, and now the same solution indicated in the case of the 12th. Tanks were already attached to this regiment, but they hadn't participated in the attack because the infantry didn't succeed in finding suitable routes for them. 4 patrols were sent out before a satisfactory route was discovered. With sufficient tank support, the leading companies of the 12th Infantry were able to reach the crossroads between Tourlaville and Hameau-Galli. To the east, it had been planned that the 22nd Infantry would assist the 12th by clearing Digosville, but the 22nd Infantry was so harassed that its combat strength was devoted mostly to dealing with enemy infiltrations and keeping its supply routes open. The objective assigned to the 8th Infantry was the high ground east of La Glacerie. Like the rest of the division, the 8th Infantry was able to make only marginal gains on June 22nd and 23rd. The 3rd Battalion in particular assaulted a strong point, while a German combat group was about to launch a counterattack at the same time. In the battle that followed, most of the Germans were routed with heavy losses from the combined infantry and tank fire, and 228 were taken prisoner. Similar in character to the 4th Division's struggle was the fight of the 79th Division. The division's logical route of attack was the Valognes-Cherbourg Highway. Major obstacles to its advance were 3 strongpoints along the highway. A 4th strongpoint was on the forward slopes of the ridge running along the road to Hardenvest. The 313th Infantry continued generally astride the highway and reached the junction of the highway with the road to Hardenvest. In the center, the 314th met fierce resistance during the day, but was able to slip through the German line after nightfall and link up with the 313th. On the division's left flank, the 315th was occupied with the task of clearing the resistance pocket at Hardenvest, so the rest of the division could proceed with the attack northward. As it happened in the sectors of the 4th Division, the Germans once again were able to cut off supply routes to the advancing regiments of the 79th Division. The division's first attack on June 23rd was to organize a task force and reopen the supply routes before attacking the next strong point. An air attack took place before the infantry attack but had no noticeable effect, and another mission was therefore planned 2 hours later. While these arrangements were being made, the 3rd Battalion jumped off and occupied part of the objective. Consequently, the division requested the air attack to be cancelled, but the bombers were already on their way and had to be diverted with yellow smoke north of the target. On the 7th Corps' left flank, the 9th Division's main impact fell along the Eckeville-Cedeville line. Profiting from the air bombardment, the 9th Division made good initial gains, with the 60th Infantry taking Eckeville and the 47th advancing beyond Bougainville. But the ease of this advance was deceptive. The 47th Infantry had bypassed strong enemy positions, and soon the leading battalions found themselves dangerously exposed. Although the regiment turned some companies around, these positions remained uncaptured, but the division commander decided to deal with them later. Similarly, the 60th Infantry found progress more difficult after taking Eckville. It attacked fortifications southwest of Flottmanville-Hague, making little progress. The critical strongpoints at Flottmanville-Hague and Hill 171, though not yet overrun, were closely pressed, and another day's action was likely to result in their capture. On June 23rd, the 39th Infantry joined the attack with tank destroyer support and cleared some of the bypassed fortified positions northwest of Bougainville. At the same time, the 47th and 60th Infantry regiments resumed their attempt to break through toward Cherbourg. Hill 171 was finally captured. The attack netted 400 prisoners and large quantities of material. At Flottmanville-Hague, the 60th Infantry waited for air support nearly all day. After the bombing and the artillery concentration that followed, it took the regiment less than 2 hours to move up and occupy its objective. Until June 23rd, General von Schlieben had commanded only the remnants of the 4 divisions immediately confronting the advancing American forces. On that day, he was appointed commander of the entire Cherbourg fortress. Although the surrounded German force continued to resist with determination, 7th Corps progress was steady after the penetration on June 23. In the final phase, the 3 infantry divisions reduced the remaining strongpoints one by one and closed in on the beleaguered city. General Collins didn't make any fundamental changes in the attack plan on June 24th. 2 battalions of the 22nd Infantry were limited to guarding the right flank and maintain the security of the supply routes to the 4th Division. The 8th Infantry attacked and captured the last strongpoint in its zone, one of the most heavily armed positions he had encountered. About 100 prisoners were taken in the vicinity of La Glacerie, and 27 more surrendered the next morning. The 8th Infantry lost 37 killed, including Lieutenant Colonel Simmons, the 1st Battalion commander. For the 8th Infantry, the capture of this strongpoint was the last day of hard fighting in the Cotentin operation. On June 25th, it cleared scattered resistance around La Glacerie. With this last action, it was pinched out and took no further part in the capture of Cherbourg. The main effort of the 4th Division was made at Toulaville. 12 P-47s bombed and strafed the objective. As soon as the last bomb fell, infantry and tanks closed in rapidly and took the strongpoint in a short fight. The capture of Toulaville did not end the 12th Infantry's activity for that night. The regiment continued the attack still further until early afternoon on June 25th, when a garrison of 400 surrendered on the eastern outskirts of the city. Elsewhere on the Corps front, German resistance was also crumbling. The continuing American attacks were given added impact by the effective air support of P-47s of the 9th Air Force. As the 313th Infantry veered slightly to the east, the 314th pushed astride the highway and reached the southern outskirts of Cherbourg. Meanwhile, the 9th Division closed in on Cherbourg as well. West of Octeville, the 47th Infantry was joined by the 39th and attacked the last strongpoint overlooking the city in their sector. Coordination between the 2 regiments was poor at first, and the 47th was delayed by fire from Flottmanville-Hague, where the 60th Infantry was clearing the remaining resistance pockets. By now, German forces in Cherbourg were well aware of their hopeless situation. On June 25th, at approximately 0700, a German medical officer of the Naval Hospital, accompanied by a captured American Air Force officer, came through the lines of the 9th Division to request that the hospital be spared from shelling and that blood plasma be sent for the wounded Americans there. He was given the plasma and returned to Cherbourg, bearing also a demand for the immediate surrender of the city. As the German commander received this demand, the 12th Infantry was pushing on the coast, and the 79th Division started fighting its way into the city. The most outstanding event of June 25th was the capture of Fort du Roule by the 314th Infantry. built high and secure into the steep rock promontory which stands immediately back of the city, the fort dominated the entire harbor area and was a formidable appearing bastion, particularly from the sea. Fort de Roule was primarily a coastal fortress, with its guns housed in the lower levels of the fort pointing seaward. However, some sections of the fort were able to hold out all day and fire at the advancing 313th to the east. Only the capture of the fort's top level was complete on June 25th. On the 9th Division's front, the 47th Infantry entered Cherbourg, while the 39th spent the day fighting in Octeville. During this day of crumbling enemy resistance, the 9th Division took more than 1,100 prisoners. The attacks of June 25th received support from the Navy as well. General Bradley had requested naval shelling of the Cherbourg batteries to be synchronized with the final land assault. A task force of 3 battleships, 4 cruisers, and destroyers formed for this purpose. The 79th and 9th Divisions virtually cleared the city on June 26th, with the 314th Infantry resuming its efforts to clear the lower levels of Fort de Roule. In the Naval Hospital, the men of the 9th Division found 150 Americans among the wounded. To the southwest, the 315th Infantry cleared the Martinvast area, taking 2,200 prisoners. The most dramatic incident of the day happened in the 39th Infantry Zone. A German prisoner reported that General von Schlieben was in an underground shelter in Saint-Sevier, just beyond Octeville. By mid-afternoon, Companies E and F had reached the shelter. After covering the tunnel entrances with machine gun fire, a prisoner was sent down to ask for the fort's surrender. When surrender was refused, tank destroyers began to fire directly into the tunnel entrances, and preparations were made to demolish the stronghold with TNT. After a few rounds, the enemy began to pour out. Among the 800 who surrendered were General von Schlieben, Admiral Hennecke of the port of Cherbourg, and their staffs. The surrender was made to General Eddy, who demanded that von Schlieben surrender the whole Cherbourg garrison. The fortress commander refused, however, adding that communications were so bad that he could not ask the others to surrender even if he wanted to. When General Collins offered to provide the means of communication, von Schlieben still declined. All organized resistance in Cherbourg ended on June 27th. What still remained was to clear resistance pockets outside the city. As the final fight was taking place in the city, the 22nd Infantry pushed eastwards, clearing enemy resistance all the way to Cap Levy. On the left flank, the 9th Division took more than 6,000 prisoners in its final attacks. At 1500 hours on July 1st, the 9th Division reported to the 7th Corps that all organized resistance had ceased. And so ended the campaign in the Cotentin Peninsula, with a heavy cost, despite a relatively easy beginning in the weakly opposed landing on Utah Beach. In the fight for its objective, the 7th Corps suffered a total of over 22,000 casualties, including 2,800 killed, 5,700 missing, and 13,500 wounded. The Germans had lost 39,000 captured, in addition to an undetermined number of killed and wounded. Another interesting aspect of the campaign is that both sides were too optimistic with their predictions. Cherbourg was captured on D-Day plus 21. The estimated date of capture mentioned in earlier planning had been D-Day plus 8, and this had been changed to D-Day plus 15 only a few days before the invasion. From the German point of view, however, the fall of Cherbourg came much sooner than expected and represented a major defeat which foreshadowed the evacuation of France and the loss of the war. Throughout German tactical thinking, the denial to the Allies of the French ports assumed a major place. The German army believed that the principal Allied asset was overwhelming material superiority and that it could be thrown decisively into the conflict only through the possession of a large port. Even after the Cotentin Peninsula was cut, preventing the reinforcement of the Cherbourg fortress, the German command still anticipated that the port could hold out for at least several weeks. The conquest of the Cotentin Peninsula did not immediately break the German defenses in the west or irrevocably ensure a quick Allied victory. A month of hard fighting in the same type of difficult Normandy terrain lay ahead. Until the end of July, the Germans continued to contest bitterly nearly every Norman field. Nevertheless, the end of June saw the disappearance of the last slim chance the Germans may have had to dislodge the Allied foothold on France, and were drawn into a hopeless battle of attrition in which the Allied armies were to build up an irresistible superiority of men and material and strike out of Normandy for their sweep through France.